wonder what secrets lie hidden in the depths of the water, waiting for the right moment to rise? Some places in the world carry a darkness so deep, so ancient, that it refuses to remain buried. This is one of those places, a seemingly innocent lake, untouched by time, yet filled with a chilling past that no one dares to speak of. In tonight's story, we follow a group of friends who, like many before them, ignored the warnings. Their curiosity led them straight into the jaws of a nightmare, an ancient creature that had been waiting for centuries, bound by a curse that could never be broken. Wendy and Evan thought they were just exploring, looking for an adventure, but some adventures have a cost too steep to pay. What happened to them is only the beginning of a tale that will unravel the mysteries of an evil that lurks beneath the surface. But be warned, as you follow along with Maya's journey to uncover the truth, you'll soon realize that not all secrets are meant to be found, and those who dig too deep may never come back. So, as we dive into this spine-chilling story, make sure you subscribe to Whispers in the Dark and ring that notification bell. You won't want to miss the terrifying, haunting tales we share every week. Join us as we unravel the unknown and discover what lies waiting in the shadows. Now, grab a seat, dim the lights, and let's begin. The Whispers are calling. Part 1. The dark waters beckon. Imagine standing at the edge of a river that from the surface looks serene and inviting, a quiet, meandering body of water reflecting the golden light of the setting sun. But beneath the surface, something ancient and terrifying lurks. You can feel it in the air, a tension that seems to vibrate with the pulse of the earth itself. It's the kind of place that feels wrong in every way, but no one dares to speak of it. The people who live nearby, the ones who have learned the truth the hard way, avoid it religiously. They warn newcomers, those who might not know any better, of the river's deadly allure. But some are too curious, too reckless to heed such warnings. And one fateful day, on January 1st, 2010, Marissa, a young woman in her late 20s, would make that fatal mistake. It was supposed to be the start of something new, a new year, a new chapter in her life. She had spent the night celebrating, laughing with friends, dancing until the early hours of the morning. The alcohol had flowed freely, dulling her senses, and with the sun beginning to rise, her group of friends decided to do something spontaneous, something daring. They decided to visit the Limpopo River, the infamous, monstrous river that bordered South Africa and Zimbabwe, a river that had claimed more lives than anyone cared to count. Marissa, drunk on laughter and liquid courage, stood at the water's edge with the others. The rest of the group hesitated, sensing the dark aura that surrounded the place, the unspoken danger that clung to the river like a shroud. But not Marissa. She was determined. She was fearless, or at least she thought she was. She was no stranger to adventure, no stranger to taking risks. And in her inebriated state, she thought nothing of the warnings. She wanted to feel the thrill, to prove to herself and to her friends that she could conquer anything. With a smile that radiated confidence, Marissa stepped into the water. The cold shock of it hit her immediately, but she didn't flinch. She waded a few steps into the river, the current tugging at her, whispering to her to come deeper. Her friends watched from the shore, their eyes wide with concern, but Marissa wasn't listening. She was caught up in the moment, in the rush of excitement, in the thrill of defying the natural order. The first time she came back to shore, laughing and soaked, her heart racing from the adrenaline, her friends cheering her on. But the second time, she ventured further, her confidence growing. She swam a little farther out, far enough that she could no longer see the bottom of the river, far enough that she could feel the pull of the current against her legs. But still, nothing happened. Nothing but the river's cold embrace and the sound of her friends' voices calling to her from the shore. "Don't push it, Marissa," they warned. "It's not safe." But Marissa, basking in her newfound courage, waved them off, laughing. "I'm fine. It's just water." She was wrong. The third time she entered the river, something was different. The air was heavier, thicker, as if the very land itself knew she was trespassing. But Marissa didn't feel it. She was too far gone in her reckless quest for adventure. She swam out again, her body slicing through the cold water, her movements becoming more confident, more assured. She turned, grinning, and waved at her friends on the shore, signaling them that she was doing fine. But as her smile lingered, something beneath the surface stirred. A ripple that didn't belong, a shadow that moved with purpose. Before she could even register what was happening, before she could even call out to her friends, the river's icy grip tightened around her. It was like being pulled by invisible hands, yanking her under the water with terrifying force. The world above her shattered into bubbles and dark, swirling waves. Her screams were swallowed by the river. She struggled against the current, but it was too strong, too unforgiving. Her body was dragged beneath, pulled farther and farther away from the safety of the shore. From the edge of the river, her friends watched in stunned horror, unable to comprehend what was happening. They had seen Marissa disappear beneath the water, and before they could even react, it was too late. Her boyfriend, panicked and desperate, dove in after her, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't know where she was. He couldn't see her. The water was too murky, the current too violent. He called out to her, but there was no answer. Only the ripples of the water and the quiet hum of the distant river. He searched, thrashing against the current, but he knew, deep down, that he was never going to bring her back. She was lost. She had become one more casualty of the Limpopo River, one more victim of its savage, unyielding nature. As Marissa's body sank deeper into the dark, cold abyss, something in the water stirred, something ancient, something that had been waiting. The Limpopo River was no ordinary waterway. It was known as the Crocodile River for a reason. And as Marissa's lifeless form was pulled beneath the surface, it was claimed by one of the apex predators that roamed these waters, crocodiles, whose primal hunger knew no mercy. The river had claimed her, just as it had claimed countless others before her. It wasn't just reckless partygoers like Marissa who fell victim to the river's deadly embrace. The Limpopo River, a treacherous boundary between Zimbabwe and South Africa, had claimed the lives of many desperate souls seeking to escape the brutal hardships of life in Zimbabwe. Refugees fleeing the war-torn country crossed into South Africa hoping to find sanctuary, but many never made it. The river, vast and unforgiving, swallowed them whole. In 2014, police discovered a chilling scene in a cave near the river, a cave that had been used as a hiding place for those attempting to cross. Inside were the remains of 15 people, victims of crocodiles that had waited patiently for the next unfortunate soul to cross its waters. But these stories, tragic as they were only a fraction of the horror. Every year, dozens of people, some of them children, some of them entire families, disappeared into the dark currents of the Limpopo River. Their names, their stories, lost to time, swallowed by the river's insatiable thirst for blood. Yet the river continued to call. It whispered to the reckless, the curious, and the desperate. It called to those who thought they were invincible, who thought they could conquer it. But the Limpopo River is not to be conquered. It is to be feared, respected, and avoided at all costs. As the sun began to set over the Limpopo River, casting long shadows across the water, Marissa's friends stood on the shore, silent and broken, watching as the current took her away. They knew, deep down, that she had made the same mistake that many before her had made. They had all heard the warnings, but no one had truly understood the danger until it was too late. The Limpopo River does not give second chances. It does not care about your bravado, your courage, or your determination. It waits patiently, silently for the next to fall into its grasp. And once it has you, it takes you without mercy, without hesitation. The river remains forever dark, forever dangerous, and once you step into its depths, you may never return. Part 2. The Unseen Forces. The sun was beginning to set over the Limpopo River, its golden hue barely piercing the dark shadows that crept along the water's edge. The once inviting current now seemed far more ominous, almost as if the river itself had tasted blood and was hungry for more. As Marissa's body disappeared beneath the depths, her friends stood frozen, unable to comprehend what they had just witnessed. They could only hear the soft sound of the water lapping against the shore, as if the river was silently mocking their helplessness. They had been too late to save her. The river had claimed its prize as it had claimed so many before her. And as the night crept in, the darkness grew heavier around them, suffocating their every breath. But the story didn't end with Marissa's death. No, the horror was only just beginning. For as they tried to process the unimaginable, they couldn't help but feel the weight of something more sinister looming over them. Something had stirred in the waters that day, something ancient, something that knew the taste of blood, something that had waited in the shadows for far too long. And it wasn't just the crocodiles. The Limpopo River wasn't just a body of water. It was a boundary, an ancient divide between two countries, two worlds. On one side, the residents of South Africa who had long feared the river's deadly pull, and on the other, the desperate refugees from Zimbabwe, hoping to escape their troubled land. Many had crossed that river, thinking they would find sanctuary in South Africa, but most never made it. The river, unforgiving and vast, had taken them without mercy. Their bodies, like Marissa's, were swallowed by the dark currents, leaving no trace behind. But it wasn't just the crocodiles that lurked beneath the surface. The river seemed to carry something darker, an evil force that had been buried for centuries, waiting for the moment to awaken. No one knew exactly what it was, but those who had lived near the river, who had grown up hearing the stories, could feel its presence. It was said that the river had a life of its own, that it could choose who it would claim and when. It didn't matter if you were a local or a stranger, young or old, brave or foolish. Once you entered the water, you were at the mercy of something much older and far more terrifying than you could ever imagine. And it wasn't just the refugees and the party-goers who suffered the consequences of this malevolent force. There were rumors, whispers of people, locals and foreigners alike, disappearing without a trace, their bodies never found, their fates sealed by the river's unyielding grasp. It wasn't always the crocodiles. Sometimes it was the river itself, or something that lurked within its depths that would claim them. It was a terrifying thought, but one that was all too real for those who lived on the river's edge. In 2014, just a few years after Marissa's tragic death, the true horror of the Limpopo River came to light. Zimbabwean and South African authorities stumbled upon a gruesome discovery, a cave hidden near the riverbank, a cave that had long been known to the locals as a place of refuge for those attempting to cross the river. Inside the cave, the remains of 15 people were found, refugees who had been caught by the river's deadly current, dragged beneath its surface by the crocodiles, or worse, by something more sinister. The discovery was both shocking and tragic, but it wasn't an isolated incident. The truth was far darker than anyone had imagined. The river had become a killing ground, a final resting place for countless souls who had thought they could outsmart the dangers lurking beneath the surface. But they had underestimated the river. They had underestimated its hunger. It was this hunger, this insatiable thirst for blood, that had claimed Marissa. She had been one of the fortunate ones, at least in comparison to the others. Her death had been quick, violent, but it was not the worst fate that the river had to offer. As the days went by, whispers of Marissa's death spread through the small town near the Limpopo River. Her friends, still in shock, found it hard to process the events of that fateful morning. They had lost her to the river, but in doing so, they had unknowingly stepped into something far larger, something that no one could have prepared them for. The river, it seemed, had taken its toll on many before them. It had seen countless victims come and go, each one adding to its dark legacy. But the true horror lay in the fact that no one knew why. What was it about the Limpopo River that made it so deadly, so merciless? Was it simply the crocodiles, the natural predators that had always existed in the waters? Or was it something more? Some ancient force that the river had absorbed over centuries, a force that had turned it into a living, breathing entity that could claim the souls of the unsuspecting. No one knew for sure, and no one dared to find out. But for those who had crossed the Limpopo River, whether by choice or by necessity, the reality was clear. There was no escape. The river held the power to take you, to drag you into its depths, and to leave you there, lost to the world. Marissa had learned this too late. Her body, along with the bodies of countless others before her, became part of the river's dark history. And as the town of Phalaborwa and others like it continued to grow, the Limpopo River waited. It waited for the next soul to wander too close, for the next victim to make the fatal mistake of thinking they could escape its grasp. And when they did, the river would claim them, just as it always had. There was no escape from the river. Not for the refugees, not for the locals, not for anyone. The dark waters of the Limpopo had become a place of legend, a place where people went to disappear. And once you entered its depths, there was no coming back. Not even the strongest, most courageous souls could outsmart the river. The river knew no mercy, and neither did the creatures that called it home. But still, the warnings went unheeded. People continued to flock to its banks, some out of curiosity, others out of desperation. And the river, silent and patient, continued to wait. It waited for the next story to unfold. Part 3. The Descent into Madness. The night after Marissa's tragic death, a heavy silence fell over Phalaborwa, the kind of silence that only follows a terrible event. The town, usually full of the quiet hum of life and the distant sounds of everyday people living their lives, seemed like a ghost town, paralyzed by the weight of the tragedy that had just occurred. The residents couldn't seem to shake the feeling that something evil lurked just beyond their reach, waiting to strike again. The air was thick with an unsettling unease, a palpable tension that refused to dissipate. Marissa's friends, her closest companions who had been with her on that fateful day, were not immune to this feeling. They found themselves unable to sleep, unable to eat, as if the horror they had witnessed had torn something deep within them, something irreparable. Yet the strangest part of it all was not the terror that gripped them. It was the inexplicable draw to the river. Despite everything that had happened, there was a magnetic pull that none of them could escape, an unnerving attraction to the very place where Marissa had met her end. It wasn't just the sense of unfinished business or guilt that weighed on their souls. No, it was the haunting whispers of the river that called to them, beckoning them to return. For weeks after Marissa's disappearance, they couldn't bring themselves to speak about it. Not out loud. It was as if the words themselves were forbidden, too heavy to utter in the light of day. But as night fell, they would gather in quiet, secret corners of their homes, each one of them haunted by the image of Marissa's lifeless form being dragged into the murky depths. They were all afraid, but they couldn't let it go. They couldn't stop thinking about the river. There was a chilling truth beneath their feelings, an undeniable instinct they couldn't explain. Every one of them had felt it, the strange sense that the Limpopo River had more to it than just water and crocodiles. It was as if the river was alive, alive in ways they couldn't understand. There were rumors in the town, old stories passed down from generation to generation, stories that no one dared to speak aloud. But now, with the loss of Marissa fresh in their minds, those whispers were louder than ever. Some of the older residents of Phalaborwa had been around long enough to know that the Limpopo was not just a river. It was something far darker, a thing of malevolent power that had been watching them for centuries. They said the river could sense fear, and it would feed on it. They said it would only claim those who ventured too close, who dared to test its boundaries. No one had ever been able to prove these stories. No one dared to, until now. Marissa's friends were no exception. Despite the grief and the terror that consumed them, they began to return to the river. It started as a whisper among them, a quiet suggestion shared between the group, one that no one dared speak aloud, yet no one was brave enough to ignore. They began to gather under the cover of night, returning to the scene of Marissa's last moments. It wasn't just curiosity driving them. It was a deep sense of guilt, an obsession that festered in their hearts. They had to understand why. They had to know what had claimed her, what had taken her under and left nothing but an empty, aching void in its wake. So they went. One by one, they all found themselves back at the edge of the river, standing in the same place where Marissa had stood just days earlier. And that's when it began. The first of them, a man named Derek, had the most trouble facing the reality of what had happened. He had known Marissa the longest. He had been with her when she first decided to take that fateful dip into the river. He had told her it was too dangerous, that the river was cursed, but he couldn't stop her. He had always thought it was just superstition, just the ramblings of the old folks who never went near the water. But after Marissa's death, everything changed. Derek stood by the water's edge that night, staring down into the murky depths. He was gripped by a feeling of dread so powerful, it felt as though the ground beneath him was sinking into the river's grasp. It was then that he heard it. A soft, almost imperceptible whisper carried on the wind. At first, he thought it was just the river's current, its natural flow creating the sound. But as he listened more closely, the whisper grew louder, almost clearer. It was as if someone was calling his name, Derek. His heart raced in his chest. He spun around, his eyes scanning the darkness, but no one was there. His friends were still gathered around the fire they had made by the riverbank. But the whisper continued, growing louder and more persistent. Derek, come closer. His feet moved of their own accord, drawn to the water's edge. It was an invisible force, something beyond his control. The others noticed his strange behavior and began to call out to him, trying to snap him out of it. But Derek didn't hear them. He couldn't hear anything but the whisper. Derek. And just like that, he stepped into the water. The river swallowed him whole. His friends screamed in horror, rushing forward to pull him back, but it was too late. The current had already seized him, pulling him further into the dark depths. Derek fought, flailing in the water, but the river seemed to drag him down with unnatural force. There was nothing they could do. They watched in terror as Derek's face disappeared beneath the water, his final cries drowned by the river's gurgling roar. The rest of the group was paralyzed, unable to move, unable to speak. The air was thick with an oppressive silence, a silence that threatened to suffocate them. They had lost Derek, just like Marissa. They couldn't understand what had happened. They couldn't explain it. But they knew one thing for certain: the river was alive. It was a predator and they were the prey. But the horror didn't stop there. The following day, the remaining friends tried to convince themselves that they had simply lost their minds, that the grief, the shock of Marissa's death had pushed them to the edge of insanity. But deep down, they knew the truth. The river was waiting, and it wasn't finished with them yet. The remaining group members began to feel the same pull. The whispers, the strange compulsion to return, grew stronger. They couldn't stop themselves. It was as if the Limpopo had claimed them all, one by one, and now it was taking its toll on their sanity. They began to see shadows moving along the riverbank, figures that shouldn't have been there. At night they could hear footsteps in the dark, soft whispers on the wind, and the unmistakable sound of something, or someone, calling them to the river once more. One by one, they began to disappear. By the time the authorities arrived, there was no sign of any of them. The river had taken them, and no one could understand why. In the end, the Limpopo River remained a place of death, a place where no one could escape its grasp. It held its secrets deep within its dark waters, and it was waiting for the next soul to wander too close, to make the mistake of thinking they could outrun its call. But no one could. No one ever would. And the river, with its dark whispers and hungry currents, would continue to claim its victims, one after the other, for as long as it existed. For the river had always been there, waiting, and it would never be finished. The whispers would never cease. Part 4. The Unforgiving Tide, No Escape. The days following Derek's disappearance were a blur for the remaining friends. They tried to make sense of what had happened, but the river, with its ominous pull and hidden danger, continued to haunt them. They couldn't shake the feeling that something much larger than their own understanding was at play. The whispers that had seduced Derek into the water now followed them, an ever-present weight pressing on their shoulders, suffocating them with the promise of more death, more loss. Sarah, Derek's girlfriend, could hardly bring herself to leave her home. She had been with him that night. She had seen it happen, watched as he moved towards the river as though entranced, his face blank with some unseen force's command. She remembered calling out to him, begging him to come back, to snap out of it. But it was as if he couldn't hear her, couldn't feel the pull of the danger that was rapidly swallowing him whole. The image of Derek's last moments, his hands reaching desperately towards the shore before being consumed by the river, was burned into her mind, replaying over and over like a haunting loop. The river had taken Derek. There was no doubt in her mind, but as she sat in her small apartment, her eyes red from sleepless nights, something inside of her snapped. There was no closure, no understanding. It was as if the world was refusing to let her forget. It was mocking her. Sarah needed to know. She had to understand why the river had taken him. She needed answers, and the only place that could provide them was the Limpopo. But it wasn't just her. Chris, who had also been there that fateful night, had slowly started to lose his grip on reality. The guilt, the confusion, the horror of seeing his best friend dragged away by the unseen hand of the river, gnawed at his insides. He tried to push it away, tried to pretend that everything was fine, but deep down he knew it was. He couldn't shake the whispers, the constant tugging sensation that told him he needed to return to the river. It had a hold on him, an iron grip that he couldn't break free from. It called to him in his dreams, whispering his name in a voice too familiar, too gentle yet terrifyingly cold. "I'm not crazy," he whispered to himself, standing at the edge of his bathroom sink, staring at his reflection. His hair was disheveled, his eyes bloodshot from a lack of sleep, and his hands trembled as he splashed water on his face. It had been nearly a week since Derek's disappearance, and each day felt like an eternity. The nightmares, the chilling voice of the river were wearing him down. But despite all of that, Chris felt something else, something much darker stirring inside of him. The river was not just a river, it was a a presence, a living thing that had claimed Derek and it wanted more. And so, without a word to anyone, without any explanation, Chris packed a bag, filled it with essentials, and drove straight towards the Limpopo River. He didn't know what he was expecting to find, but something told him that the answers he needed would be found there. But little did he know, the river was waiting for him. Sarah wasn't far behind him. She didn't trust Chris to go alone, not after what had happened to Derek. Despite every warning she had heard, despite the stories that she knew deep down were true, she followed him. It wasn't just for Derek anymore, it was for herself. She needed to know. She needed to understand the grip the Limpopo had on them, on their very souls. The sun was low in the sky as they approached the riverbank. A soft breeze rustled the trees, the sound of the river flowing like a constant murmur in the background. It should have been peaceful, serene even. But it was. There was a heavy air about the place, as if the river itself was watching, waiting. The land was eerily quiet, the birds had stopped singing, and even the insects seemed to have fled. It felt like the calm before the storm. "Chris, I don't think we should do this," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. She felt the dread settle deep in her chest, but Chris was already walking towards the edge of the river, his eyes glazed, his movements mechanical. It was as though something had already taken control of him, something darker than grief or loss. He stopped at the water's edge, staring into the blackness of the river. The surface was calm, unnervingly still, but beneath that stillness, Sarah could feel the power. The current wasn't visible, but she knew it was there. It was something more than water, more than a force of nature. It was alive. "Do you hear it?" Chris asked, his voice trembling with what Sarah could only describe as excitement. "It's calling to me." Sarah looked at him, her heart pounding. She could hear it too, the whispering. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there. Like a voice carried on the wind. A voice she didn't want to hear. A voice she had to silence. "Chris, we need to leave, now," but it was too late. His footstep hit the water's edge, and the river seemed to stir. The water rippled, as though reacting to his presence. Sarah grabbed his arm, trying to pull him back, but it was as if he were cemented in place. His eyes were wide and his breath shallow, as if he were caught between two worlds. "I have to do this," Chris whispered, more to himself than to Sarah. "I have to understand why." Before Sarah could stop him, Chris stepped into the water. The river welcomed him. It pulled him in like an old friend, drawing him deeper, farther from the shore. Sarah screamed, but it was too late. The whispers became louder, more insistent. It wasn't just Chris the river wanted, it wanted her too. As she reached out to him, her fingers brushing his wrist, a sudden force yanked him out of her grasp. "No," she screamed, but her voice was lost in the growing roar of the water. Chris was gone. Vanished beneath the surface, swallowed whole by the river that had already taken so much. Desperation surged through Sarah. She couldn't lose him too. She couldn't. Not like this. She waded into the water, her heart pounding in her chest, her breath coming in frantic gasps. But as soon as her feet hit the cold, slick rocks beneath the surface, she felt it. The river, like a living thing, was pulling her deeper, urging her to come closer. She fought against it, her body instinctively resisting the pull, but it was no use. She was trapped. The river was alive and it was hungry. As Sarah's limbs began to grow heavier, her vision blurry, she realized that she wasn't just fighting the river anymore. She was fighting something much older, something far darker than she could ever imagine. The Limpopo wasn't just a river. It was a predator, and its thirst for souls could never be quenched. Part 5. The Depths of the Unseen. The water was cold. Not just cold in the way a river should be, but cold in the way it made Sarah's skin feel numb, her limbs heavy with something much more insidious than physical fatigue. As her fingers gripped the slick rocks beneath her, She could feel them slipping away, the ground itself rejecting her, pushing her deeper into the maw of the river that seemed to open up beneath her like a vast, uncharted abyss. It wasn't just the physical struggle of the river pulling her under that terrified Sarah. It was the quiet understanding that the Limpopo wasn't just a natural force. There was something more, something ancient and dark that had watched them, called to them, and now, in her desperation, she was part of it. It had claimed Derek. It had claimed Chris. And now it was reaching for her. A part of her wanted to scream, to call out for help, but the more she struggled, the deeper she sank, and it felt as though the river itself had woven her into its rhythm, into its cold, unyielding current. There were no sounds in the water, no familiar rush of waves. Only the growing whispers, barely audible at first but now louder, clearer. They surrounded her, every breath she took pulled in sync with the rhythm of the river. They weren't just the soft, distant whispers of wind or current. No, they were voices, distinct, familiar, and yet impossibly distant. As though they had traveled through time, bringing with them the weight of centuries. They were speaking to her, to everyone who had ever come here. Join us. Become part of us. Just let go. The voice was cold. It wasn't Derek's voice. It was Chris's voice. It was something older, something that had been here long before they ever set foot on its shores. Sarah, come closer. Join us. Become one with the river. Her eyes burned, her chest tight as though the water itself was pressing in, suffocating her, pushing the breath from her lungs. She fought to keep herself above the water, but it was like trying to swim in quicksand. No matter how hard she kicked, how much she pulled, she was only drawn deeper into its clutches. The river had a will of its own, an ancient power that seemed to feed off their fear, their desperation. But she couldn't just give in. She couldn't lose herself the way Chris had. She couldn't let the river claim her like it had Derek. With every ounce of strength she had left, she reached for the nearest rock, her hand grazing something cold and smooth. The river seemed to scream in protest, its invisible hands pushing against her, pulling her down. But Sarah held on. She gritted her teeth, her fingernails scraping against the stone, and with a force of will she didn't know she possessed, she pulled herself up, breaking free from the pull of the current, dragging herself onto the riverbank. She lay there for what felt like an eternity, gasping for air, the whispers still lingering in the back of her mind. They wouldn't go away. The river didn't let go so easily. It had tasted them. It knew their names. And it was still calling for them. Her heart thundered in her chest, but as she finally looked up, she saw him, Chris. His body was sprawled on the bank beside her, his face ashen, his eyes wide open but lifeless. He had made it out of the water just like she had. But the river hadn't finished with them yet. It had left its mark on him, as it had left its mark on Derek. Tears blurred her vision as she crawled to his side, shaking him, but there was no response. The realization hit her like a blow to the stomach. Chris was gone. The river had taken him, but it hadn't claimed him completely, not yet. It still had its hold on them. Its whispers still echoed through the air. Don't resist. It's easier if you let go. Sarah recoiled at the voice. The words twisted in her mind, like roots burrowing into the soil, digging deeper and deeper with every passing second. She stood shakily, her body trembling, her heart still caught in the grip of the river's pull. She didn't know how long she could stay here, how long she could fight this force. But she knew one thing for sure. The river wasn't finished with her. Not yet. Suddenly, a shadow passed over her, and for a brief moment she thought it was the river coming back for her. But as she looked up, she saw him. It was Derek, or rather, the shape of Derek. He stood at the edge of the water, his figure barely visible in the fading light. His body was drenched, his clothes soaked, his hair clinging to his face. But there was something wrong about him. He didn't look like the Derek she had known, the Derek she had loved. His eyes were empty, his face expressionless. He was walking towards her, but it was Derek. It was something else. Something that the river had left behind. Something that had been twisted by the river's power, warped and reshaped. Her breath caught in her throat as he came closer, his steps slow and deliberate. Every step he took seemed to make the air grow colder, the earth beneath her feet heavier. She could feel the pull of the water once again, the whispers returning louder than ever, urging her to follow, to give in. But she wouldn't. Not this time. Not after everything they had been through. Derek. Her voice cracked as she called out, though she knew it wasn't him. It couldn't be. His head tilted to the side, and for a moment she saw a flicker of recognition in his eyes. But then it was gone, replaced by something far darker. Something alien, something that didn't belong. "You shouldn't have come back, Sarah," the figure whispered, his voice a mixture of the Derek she had loved and the thing that now stood before her. She recoiled, stepping back, fear flooding her veins. The whispers grew louder, louder still, as though they were closing in on her from all directions. The water churned, the current roared in her ears, and the figure of Derek, or whatever it was, moved closer, its feet never leaving the ground, its presence growing more overwhelming with each step. In that moment, Sarah realized the truth. She had never left the river. It had always been inside her. It was never just the water that had claimed them. It was something far older, something ancient, something that had always been waiting for the right moment to reach out and claim their souls. And now it was coming for her. As Sarah stood there frozen, her mind screamed for escape, but the river had already pulled her in, body, soul, and heart. There was nowhere to run. The river had her now, and it wasn't going to let go. The darkness of the river, its ancient power, the whispers that had lured them in, it was all too much. But Sarah wasn't done yet. Not yet. She still had one thing left to do. Part 6. The Final Reckoning. The night had fallen, casting its thick, oppressive silence over the riverbank. Sarah's breaths came in shallow gasps as she stood frozen, her heart hammering in her chest. The twisted figure of Derek loomed in front of her, motionless but for the subtle sway of the water beneath his feet. The last traces of daylight had already fled, and the river's dark current seemed to pulse with a life of its own, as if it were a sentient being, watching her every move. The whispers of the river grew louder, almost unbearable now. They echoed through her mind, crashing in like waves. The voices, once distant and elusive, now felt so close, so real, that she could almost reach out and touch them. "Join us. Come home. Let go." They were relentless, beckoning her deeper into the darkness. Sarah's mind raced, her body trembling with both fear and cold. The figure of Derek, or what was left of him, moved closer, its slow, deliberate steps making no sound on the earth, as if the ground itself had become part of the river's grasp. She could no longer recognize the man she had known, the man she had loved. This thing was something else entirely, a shadow of the person who had once stood beside her. Her heart twisted in her chest as she tried to steady herself, but every instinct in her told her to flee. But where? The river was behind her, its pull growing stronger with every passing moment. The land felt as though it had been swallowed up by the dark force that ruled this place. There was no escape. Derek. Her voice broke, barely more than a whisper, her throat raw. "Please, don't do this." The figure before her flickered for a moment as though something deep within it stirred. His eyes, those hollow, empty eyes, seemed to soften just for a moment. There was a flicker of recognition, a hint of the Derek she had known, but then it vanished. The river's grip on him was too strong, its power far greater than anything Sarah could comprehend. "Sarah," the creature spoke, its voice a haunting combination of Derek's warmth and the malevolent coldness of the river. "You don't understand. I was chosen. We all were." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Chosen, chosen. What did that even mean? It didn't make sense. Nothing made sense anymore. She wanted to run. She needed to run, but her legs refused to obey. Her body was frozen in place like a deer caught in headlights staring into the abyss. The whispers, the voices, kept calling to her, and every second she stood there they grew louder, more insistent. "Derek," she cried, her voice breaking with desperation. "This isn't you. This isn't who you are." But Derek, if that was even his name anymore, didn't answer. He just stared at her with those hollow eyes. And then the ground beneath her feet seemed to shift, to rise up, as though it had been waiting for this moment. Sarah felt the earth tremble, the air thickening, suffocating her. The river had begun to churn, its waters darkening even further, swirling and crashing like a storm within a storm. The creature, Derek's twisted form, reached out, his hand grasping the air as if trying to pull her into the depths of the river with him. His lips parted, but no words came. Only the whispers. They were louder now, deafening, overwhelming. "Come to us, join us, become part of the river." It wasn't just Derek anymore. It was the river itself speaking through him. And Sarah knew, she just knew, that if she stayed here, if she allowed this thing to touch her, she would be lost forever. Her pulse thundered in her ears, her breath quick and shallow. She had to fight. She had to survive. She couldn't let the river claim her, not like it had claimed Derek, not like it had claimed Chris. And yet, as much as she fought against it, the river's call seemed to sink into her bones, the darkness pressing against her from all sides. It wanted her. It needed her. The creature took another step toward her, its movements smooth, unnatural. The air around them seemed to warp, the world around them narrowing. The whispers grew, the ground shook, and the very water itself seemed to rise, twisting upward, reaching for her. Sarah's heart was pounding so loudly in her chest that she could barely think. She stumbled backward, her legs unsteady, every instinct telling her to run, to escape. But the river wasn't just in front of her. It was everywhere. It had already swallowed the land, the air, the light. It had claimed everything. And then, just as the figure of Derek's twisted form reached for her, something broke through. A distant sound. A faint, almost imperceptible hum, like a soft echo from far away. It was faint, but it was real. Her heart skipped. She wasn't alone. There was someone, something, maybe a light in this suffocating darkness. With what little strength she had left, Sarah forced herself to turn away from the creature. She didn't dare look back, not even once. She had to run, to get out of the river's reach, to escape the nightmare that had claimed so much. The river's grip tightened, pulling at her heels, but Sarah pushed forward, her body numb with fear and adrenaline. Every step felt like wading through quicksand, but she kept moving. The sound, the hum, it was getting louder now, unmistakable. Someone was coming. Someone had heard her. She had to make it. And just when Sarah thought she couldn't go any further, when her legs were ready to give out, she saw it. A flicker of light, like a beacon cutting through the darkness, breaking the river's hold on her. She could hear voices now, distant but growing closer. But the creature, Derek's twisted form, was still there, standing at the edge of the river, watching her with those hollow, unblinking eyes. And though it seemed far away, Sarah could feel the pull of its gaze. It wasn't over. Not yet. The rescue was close. But Sarah knew deep down that no matter how far she ran, no matter how far she tried to escape, she would never truly leave the river behind. It had already taken too much. The final reckoning was coming. The light flickered in and out, as though the night itself were trying to swallow it whole. Sarah's heart raced with every step she took toward that distant, beckoning glow. Her breaths were shallow, her body trembling, not just from exhaustion but from the weight of the terror that seemed to cling to her like a second skin. The wisp. But there was a voice in her head that was louder than the whispers, the sound of her own will, her own refusal to succumb to the darkness. She couldn't stop now. not when she was so close. She could feel the ground beneath her feet, the rough texture of the soil pressing into her skin, grounding her, keeping her tethered to the world she once knew. The river was relentless, but she was stronger. As she stumbled toward the light, the figures in the distance began to take shape. Two silhouettes moved swiftly, purposefully toward her. The flickering light was growing brighter, stronger. The figures were close now, the faintest traces of their features becoming clearer. They were men, two of them running toward her, their faces set in grim determination. Her breath caught in her throat. She recognized them. One was Steve, Chris's older brother. The other was Sam, a local fisherman who had been part of the search party. They had come for her. "Sarah," Steve shouted, his voice barely audible over the rushing of the river. His face was tense with fear and urgency. "Come on, we need to move now." But as she took a few steps toward them, something cold and insidious gripped her, tightening like a vice around her chest. She could feel the pull of the river even from here. The water was like a living thing, reaching for her, demanding that she return to it. "Sarah, move!" Sam yelled, his eyes wide with panic as he reached out to grab her arm. But as Steve and Sam tried to pull her closer, the river answered, its dark waters lapping at her feet, pulling her backward. The earth trembled again, and Sarah felt the ground beneath her give way as though it too were being consumed by the river. "No," she cried, trying to push against the pull, but it was too strong, too fast. Suddenly, Derek's form was back, standing at the edge of the river, his gaze fixed on Sarah. His hollow eyes burned with an intensity that froze her to the spot. And then he stepped forward as though the river itself were carrying him toward her, guiding him back to her. "Sarah." His voice rasped, more like a low growl than the voice she once knew. "You can't leave me. You can't leave this place." "It's too late." The men were pulling. "No," she screamed again, her voice breaking. "I won't go back. Not to this. Not to you." The river surged, its dark waters rising up like an angry wave, pulling her feet from the ground. Sam and Steve shouted, trying to hold on to her, but the river seemed to have a life of its own, a will of its own, and it was too strong. Derek's face twisted into something unrecognizable, the skin stretching tight across his features as though it were being pulled by invisible strings. His eyes never left her, the dark voids of his gaze pulling her in deeper into the abyss. "You're mine now," he whispered. "We're all part of the river. It's inevitable." The men fought to hold her, but it was as if the river had become a force they could not defy. With a final scream, Sarah was torn from their grasp, her body dragged into the water. The chill of the river was like ice, cutting through her skin, through her very soul. The river didn't care about her fear. It didn't care about her struggle. It was ancient, timeless, a force that had claimed countless lives before hers and would claim countless more after her. As the cold water enveloped her, Sarah's body went limp, and for a moment the world seemed to spin around her, darkness closing in from every side. The whispers, so loud, so real, filled her mind until there was nothing else. "Join us. Come home, it's too late." And then everything went black. Somewhere deep in the darkness, a faint light appeared. It was small at first, like the glow of a distant star, but it grew stronger, brighter, as though it were pushing back the night itself. Sarah felt the warmth of it on her skin, felt the weight of the darkness lifting, even if just a little. She opened her eyes, her mind cloudy and disoriented, but there it was, light, warmth, life. She reached out, but her body felt heavy, like it was made of stone. And then, as her fingers touched the light, everything shifted. The light expanded, surrounding her, swallowing the darkness, pushing it back. And then she was free. The oppressive weight of silence enveloped Sarah as she floated in the cold abyss, unsure whether she was alive or lost to the depths. Her body, once full of panic and desperation, now felt like an empty vessel, drifting without control. The crushing darkness of the river seemed to pulse around her, tightening like a noose, pulling her deeper. But then something changed. A glimmer of light cut through the blackness, flickering like a distant beacon. It wasn't a loud voice, nor a forceful command, but a quiet beckoning that called to her. It wasn't like the shadows. This light felt warm, inviting. Sarah tried to move toward it, but her limbs were stiff, unwilling to cooperate. It was as if her body was trapped in a trance, caught between the world of the living and something far darker. She could hear whispers again, but these weren't the same as before. These were soft, almost like a lullaby, comforting, guiding her towards the light. "Sarah, come to us," the voices cooed. For a brief, terrifying moment, Sarah hesitated. What if the light was another trick, another form of deception crafted by the river, the one force that had already claimed so many others? But the warmth was undeniable, the pull too strong to resist. With what little strength remained, Sarah willed herself to move, her hand reaching towards the light, her body barely responding. And then she felt it, a hand, a real warm hand. It clasped her fingers, pulling her upward, away from the cold grasp of the river. "You're not alone," a voice murmured in her ear, familiar yet distant. It was a voice she hadn't heard in what felt like forever. It was Chris, her brother. Tears sprang to her eyes as his presence surrounded her. How could this be? How could he be here now after everything? She had lost him in the chaos of that night, in the flood of terror that had overtaken them all. But now here he was, pulling her into the warmth of the light. "You're safe," Chris whispered as his arm wrapped around her. "You don't belong here. This isn't your time." Sarah wanted to speak, to ask him how, to demand answers, but no words came. Her body felt alive again, the suffocating grip of the water slowly loosening its hold on her. She felt herself being lifted, her body rising through the air as the light grew brighter, clearer, until she was standing on solid ground. Before her stood Chris, not the lost figure from the past, but the very same person who had once protected her, who had kept her safe. His eyes, though filled with sorrow, held the warmth of someone who truly understood her pain. "Chris," she whispered, her voice hoarse. How are you here?" He smiled softly, the sadness never leaving his eyes. "The river, it takes what it wants. But there are places, Sarah, where it can't reach. I've been waiting for you." Sarah blinked, feeling the weight of his words sink in. Waiting, but for what? What did it mean? She looked around, realizing they were standing in a strange place, not quite real, yet not quite a dream. It was like a threshold, a boundary between worlds. The air was heavy, thick with an energy she couldn't explain. The water that had once seemed so overwhelming now appeared distant, almost unreal, as if it were part of a nightmare she was slowly waking from. "You don't belong here, Sarah," Chris said again, his voice steady. "The river doesn't define you. You're stronger than it, stronger than the darkness that's tried to consume you. But what about Derek? What about the others?" Sarah asked, her heart aching for the people she had left behind, for the ones who had not made it out of the river's grip. Chris shook his head. "You can't save them all. Sometimes you need to let go. It's hard to understand, but you can't live in the shadow of what's already been lost." The words hit her like a wave, but she held onto them, feeling the weight of the truth pressing down on her chest. She had to move on. She had to let go of the guilt that threatened to pull her under. A figure stepped forward from the light, a figure she hadn't expected to see. It was Steve, his face familiar yet distant, as if he too had crossed a threshold Sarah could not yet comprehend. "Sarah," Steve said, his voice softer than she remembered, "it's not over yet, you still have a choice." "A choice?" Sarah repeated, looking between Chris and Steve. "What do you mean?" The two men exchanged a glance, one that seemed to carry the weight of unspoken truths. Then Chris spoke. "The choice is yours, Sarah," he said. You can return to the world you left behind, the world of the living. You can face the consequences of what happened, but you will do it with the strength of knowing you are more than the river's pull. Or you can stay here with us. You can be at peace. But know this, Sarah, peace doesn't erase the truth. It only lets you forget. Sarah's chest tightened as the words washed over her. The river, the darkness, the terror, it all felt so far away now. But could she truly return? Could she face the aftermath of everything that had happened? Before she could speak, the ground beneath her feet began to shift. The world she was in started to tremble, fading slowly like a dream slipping away. "This is your final moment," Steve said. "You've seen the truth. Now it's time to decide." As Sarah took a deep breath, she realized the answer was already within her. She had already made her choice. She was stronger than the darkness. She had to return, not just for herself, but for the ones she had left behind. With a final glance at Chris and Steve, she stepped forward, her heart filled with determination. The lights swirled around her, and the last of the shadows retreated. She felt her body being pulled upward, away from the river, back into the world she had almost lost forever. As Sarah felt herself being drawn toward the light, her body trembling with anticipation, she suddenly became aware of the stillness that surrounded her. The swirling warmth and the sense of safety were now replaced by a deep, unsettling silence. The voices that had once comforted her, guiding her toward the light, now faded into a soft murmur in the distance. She turned around, but the familiar faces of Chris and Steve were gone. All that remained was the eerie emptiness of this strange in-between place. There was nothing left but the weight of her decision. She realized that she was now alone, completely alone. And yet somehow she wasn't afraid. The truth was clear now. She had been given the opportunity to let go of everything, the guilt, the anger, the sorrow, and to be at peace. But there was a deeper truth within her, one that she could no longer ignore. Sarah wasn't ready to let go. She wasn't ready to forget. Her journey wasn't over, not yet. The river, the darkness, the people who had been lost, they had all played a part in shaping who she had become. But she had her own path to walk now, one that would no longer be defined by the tragedy that had nearly swallowed her whole. With newfound clarity, she stepped forward into the light. The warmth grew stronger, enveloping her as she felt her body become lighter. Her thoughts began to clear, and she could feel herself being lifted, as though weightless, drifting away from the chaos of the past. And then, just as suddenly as it had all begun, the light faded. The oppressive silence was replaced with the distant sound of rushing water, the roar of the river. The cold, wet sensation of the current against her skin returned, but this time it was different. Sarah opened her eyes, and for a moment she thought she was back at the riverbank, trapped in the cycle of darkness once again. But something was different. She wasn't drowning. She wasn't sinking. The water didn't hold the same terror it once had. The truth hit her like a wave. She had made it. She had survived the river. She was back. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Sarah breathed deeply, her chest rising and falling with a newfound sense of strength. The memories of the river, of the terror, the darkness were still there, but they no longer had the power to define her. She had faced the worst of it. She had made her choice. And now the river no longer controlled her fate. As she stumbled to her feet, her eyes scanning the shore, she saw a figure standing in the distance. It was Derek, the man who had been lost in the river's grasp. His silhouette was barely visible against the mist, but Sarah could feel his presence. "Derek," she called, her voice shaky but determined. The figure didn't move at first, and for a split second Sarah wondered if she had imagined him. But then, slowly, Derek began to walk toward her, his figure becoming clearer with each step. He was different now. No longer the man who had been swallowed by the river's fury. He was whole. alive. And when he finally stood before her, the expression on his face was one of peace, of understanding. "Sarah," Derek said, his voice gentle but firm, "you made it. You've done what no one else could. You've faced the darkness." Sarah looked at him, her heart pounding in her chest. "But what about everything we've lost? The others, are they gone?" Derek smiled softly. "They're not gone. They're with us in the stories we carry, in the lives we continue to live. You didn't lose them, Sarah. You freed yourself from the weight of their loss." Tears welled in her eyes as the realization hit her. She had freed herself. And in doing so, she had found something she never thought she would: peace. The river had taken so much from her, but in the end, it had given her something more valuable than she could ever have imagined. The strength to move forward, the ability to let go, and the clarity to see that the future, no matter how uncertain, was hers to shape. As Sarah turned away from Derek, the world around her seemed to shift, the landscape changing into something more familiar. The forest surrounding the river seemed brighter, more vibrant, and the once terrifying current now felt like a gentle stream. She was no longer the woman who had walked into the river, desperate and broken. She was someone new, someone stronger. And with each step she took away from the river, she knew that her journey wasn't just a fight for survival, it was a fight for herself. For the first time in what felt like forever, Sarah smiled. She had survived, and now she was ready to live. The end, or is it? As Sarah continues her journey, she realizes that the shadows of her past will always be a part of her, but they no longer control her. She holds the power now, not just to survive, but to thrive. And perhaps, just perhaps, the river wasn't the only place where she would find her reckoning. With a final glance back at the misty waters, Sarah turns toward the horizon, ready for whatever comes next. As we look back on Sarah's harrowing journey, it becomes evident that the path she took was not just one of survival, but of profound transformation. From the moment she found herself at the mercy of the dark, mysterious river, she was not just fighting for her life. She was fighting for her very essence, her soul, and her future. The river represented more than just a body of water. It embodied all the fear, the pain, the unresolved trauma that had followed Sarah for years. In confronting it, she was not only facing an external danger, but also the internal demons that had haunted her throughout her life. When Sarah first ventured into the river, it was clear that she wasn't prepared. She was overwhelmed by her emotions, clouded by the grief of losing her loved ones and the weight of the darkness that had infiltrated her thoughts. The river's pull was immediate, almost like it was drawing her toward an inevitable end. And for a time, it seemed like the river would swallow her, as it had so many others before her. But Sarah's story is not just one of tragedy. It's a story of growth, resilience, and eventual clarity. As Sarah swam deeper into the river's grip, she began to feel the terrifying isolation that comes with the overwhelming force of fear and uncertainty. It was as if the darkness of her mind was mirrored by the depths of the river. And yet, in that terrifying moment, she realized something crucial. She was still alive. She could still choose. This pivotal moment marked the beginning of her transformation. The river, while a symbol of destruction, became Sarah's teacher. It showed her that fear doesn't define us. It's our actions in the face of fear that determine our fate. The river wasn't going to let her go easily, and neither would her past. But by facing the darkness head-on, Sarah began to reclaim control over her life. She made a decision to fight, not just to survive, but to thrive. The darkness wasn't something to fear, but something to understand and learn from. And with each step Sarah took away from the river, away from the ghosts of her past, she grew stronger. The river had shown her that life wasn't about avoiding the darkness. It was about navigating through it and learning from it. As Sarah's journey unfolded, we saw her struggle, her triumphs, and her moments of deep reflection. The moments where she stood on the precipice of despair, facing the weight of loss, were contrasted with moments of profound clarity, where she realized that she had the power to change her course. But this power didn't come from some magical force. It came from within her. It came from the realization that no matter how deep the river ran, she could always choose to swim, always choose to reach for the light. Through the course of her journey, Sarah learned that the pain we carry does not have to define us. Just like the river, life is full of obstacles, of dangerous currents that try to pull us under. But the key to surviving isn't avoiding the struggles, it's learning how to navigate them. The river's darkness might still be there, lurking in the shadows, but by acknowledging it and understanding it, we can find the strength to move forward. Perhaps the most important lesson Sarah learned was about the power of choice. At any point, she could have chosen to give in to the darkness, to allow the river to take her completely. But instead, she chose to swim. She chose to fight. She chose to face her fears and her grief head-on. That choice, to keep moving, to keep fighting, to keep living, is what ultimately saved her. And it's the same choice that each of us can make, no matter what our own river may look like. So what can we learn from Sarah's journey? The lesson is simple, yet profound. In life, we are often faced with moments that feel insurmountable, moments where the weight of the world feels like it's too much to bear. But in those moments, we have a choice. We can either let the current of fear and doubt pull us under, or we can choose to fight, to swim, to keep moving forward. And it's not just about surviving. It's about finding meaning and strength in the struggle. It's about understanding that even in the darkest moments, there is always a way out, if we choose to keep looking for it. In our own lives, we are often presented with challenges that seem insurmountable, whether it's a personal loss, a setback in our career, or the weight of our own insecurities. But just like Sarah, we have the power to choose how we respond to these challenges. We don't have to let them define us. Instead, we can choose to face them, to learn from them, and to grow stronger because of them. It's not easy. It's not always clear what the right path is, and sometimes the darkness feels overwhelming. But the truth is, we are never truly alone. The river may seem endless, but just like Sarah, we can find our way through it. And in doing so, we not only survive, we thrive. Now, I'd love to hear from you. What did you think of Sarah's story? What lessons did you take away from her journey? Have you ever faced a moment in your own life where you had to choose to fight, even when the odds seemed impossible? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's start a conversation and support each other in our journeys. If you enjoyed Sarah's story and want to hear more stories of resilience, hope, and transformation, be sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Your support means everything to us, and it motivates us to keep bringing you more powerful, thought-provoking stories. Thank you for being part of this community, and we look forward to sharing more with you soon.